Hi, everyone. I've got Pete Williston with me today. And Pete, can you tell me a little bit about your bank?
Well, we're Citizens Bank in Lafayette, Tennessee. We're a $920 million community bank, traditional community bank, and we're mostly in rural markets. We're a combination of about six banks that have been merged into our bank over the last 30 years. And in most cases, when we brought those banks in, we kept the original name. So we actually operate under five different brand names right now. Something we're working on, but we're not there yet.
So it's always interesting when you're bringing in a lot of different banks into one organization. I've heard lots of horror stories from different banks as they've gone through that and some success stories. So what was life like before you started this process to bring them all together and to build a predictable success machine like a franchise system to get them all understanding that there's some optimization that's available by coming together?
Well, we we were a bank of order takers. We waited for the customer to come in. They told us what we want. We delivered it promptly and succinctly, and then they left. And so we really didn't sell that much. So lack of a sales culture was a big issue for us. Because we had also brought in five other banks into our culture, and they continued to operate under their original name. We had a real us versus them mentality among our employees. It was basically our bank versus the other banks. And in fact, I told our senior management, I said, I think we know how to serve our customers really well, but we don't know how to serve the other bank's customers and vice versa. And that was a real issue for us. We also, quite frankly, had a lot of passive aggressive attitudes and reactions to how we dealt with each other and how we dealt with situations. So those are some things that we really needed to address in order to move our bank forward.
Interesting. So I got to imagine if you've got passive aggressive behavior going on and they going on, everybody trying to be the boss. Whenever you have that there are probably some challenges to getting everybody to align and to go in the same direction and to get everybody aligned with how their highest and best use of their time and how they tie to profit. So what were some of the things that would have prevented you from getting started to implement a process like the process we helped you implement? What were some of the things that would have prevented you from doing that you had to wrestle down to the ground?
Probably the biggest issue that we dealt with, we attended a profit growth banking seminar in Atlanta, and on the drive back to Tennessee, we debated the impact that it would have on our people and how many people would just say, this isn't for me. And there was a lot of fear in that car that night on the way back from Atlanta. And we had estimates from as high as 20%. Reality is, I think we've lost about 3% of our workforce who just said, this isn't for me. I don't want to do that. And they chose a different place to go, and that was okay with us. And we're still friends, no harm, no foul. But truth of the matter is that 3% is about our normal annual attrition rate.
Interesting. So you got better alignment than from a value system standpoint too, because those who remained are like, heck yeah, we want to be a part of something high performing, and that would be fun. So what happened that made you want to make a change?
After we had merged our last bank in, our most recent bank in, we had a strategic planning session, and we went through all the things that we really needed to do in order to grow the bank. And there were quite a few items on the list, but the three biggest issues that we saw were, number one, we needed a sales culture. We didn't know how to sell. As I said, we were order takers. We let the customer tell us what they wanted, we gave it to them, and then we showed them the door. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, we needed a much better service culture. We had trouble serving customers that we didn't know. And as we got bigger, that was going to be the norm, not the exception. Thirdly, as we merge banks in, we have a philosophy or an approach we take. We don't lay anybody off. We believe that layoffs are death for a community bank. And so we figured out how to find a job for everybody. And for the most part, we've been very successful at that. Unfortunately, what we found was that sometimes we put the wrong person in the wrong job. And we had to have a process where we could determine if we were putting the right people in the right job. And if you'll remember, we talked several years ago and you asked us what were our issues, and we laid those 3 issues out. And we've worked on those for the last year and a half with you and your team.
Interesting. So let's talk about some of the needle shifts that you've had, because at the end of the day, it's like, what needles are we moving? What are the important ones to move? And are they moving? And are they moving in the right directions? And are they moving sustainably? So Pete, can you tell me a little bit about the changes that you made to hit your goals? So what needles did you move? And what kind of things did you put in place to make sure those needles moved and stayed sustainable and advancing after you moved them in the right direction?
Well, we're a traditional community bank, so we tend to be margin driven.
Mm-hmm.
While we continue to focus on looking for new ways to generate new types of fee income, we knew we had to address the margin in order to grow the earnings of the bank and to grow the bank. So we started focusing on the margin, and primarily for us, that meant loan growth. We had plenty of deposits. We had a relatively low loan to deposit ratio, and we knew we needed to shift some assets from securities, from lower yielding securities to higher yielding loans. So we started putting an emphasis on growing loans. We started setting goals for each of our branches, each of our officers, and we started rewarding them for those goals. And in the last year and a half, we also make a very big deal about recognizing those officers, those employees who are doing what it takes to bring in the business we need to grow the bank and to grow the net interest margin. We also organized a lot. We didn't have a lot of meetings before, and quite frankly, and you've told me this, high-performing banks tend to have more meetings. Well, we have more meetings now. I meet with my senior management team every month to go over in detail projects they're working on, and they have to report to each other where they stand on those projects, so we're accountable to each other. I also meet one-on-one with each of my senior managers on a lot of the same topics, and we talk about where we need to be and where we need to go. I think also one thing that's really helped us is we established something called a margin management committee, and it's really our asset liability committee, but we meet separately from the standard review the model and where do we stand on interest rate risk and that sort of thing. And our goal is every time we meet, we want to move the margin by 1 basis point, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's $90,000. And every time we meet, if we can move the margin $90,000 at the end of the year, we move the margin by $1 million. So sometimes we do it by 3 basis points. Sometimes we scratch to get to 1. But when we started the process, we had a net interest margin of around 380. And we just crossed 4 at the end of August for the month of August, and our goal is to have it by 4, an average of 4 for the year, by continually looking at ways to improve that net interest margin. So we're much more laser focused on what is it going to take to improve that margin.
Yeah, and with lesser risk, because the old approach they taught us in graduate school of banking was the only way to raise margin is to take more risk. I'm like, who made up that crazy rule? The best way to run a bank is A+ quality credits at premium pricing, but that's a different game to know how to do that as well. So Pete, everybody's always talking about cross sales, and most banks have had that on their strategic plan for about 30 years, trying to get that number up, but nobody's really moving that number, and they just keep putting on the strategic plan like it's a new idea every year. You made a tremendous amount of progress on that. Where'd you move it from and to? And how did you do it? What worked?
Well, when we started 18 months ago, our cross sales were at 1.81 per new account open. So we were really low. And we started pushing a 7-step sales process, focusing on the customer situation and their needs and selling them products that they truly needed. And if they didn't need it, we didn't push it on them. So our progress has been slow but steady. We ended August with an average of 3.87 cross sales per new account open, but we had 2 weeks in there where we had cross sales over 4. So
Nice.
we've had 3 weeks so far just in the last 2 months where we had cross sales over 4. So I'm looking for that month when our average is over 4 every week. Now, our cross sales to existing customers has taken an even more dramatic leap. I think the first month that we measured it about 15 months ago, we had 321 cross sales to existing customers. We hit in August of this year, we hit 1,065,
Wow.
which was over 2.5 times what we did in August of last year. So we're really seeing a lot of progress in cross sales to existing customers. So we're excited about that.
Okay, so let's talk about 2 things that matter to every bank right now. So since there are hundreds of studies that prove that culture is the leading predictor of future growth and profitability, and because you went through a very challenging situation called bringing a lot of different entities under different names and bring it all into one organization, you've been challenged with that, I'm sure. Tell me a little bit about how you're measuring your culture, how you're moving it ahead, and what kind of impact is that having on your bottom line?
Question about the culture survey. You know, we measured it right before we started a culture transformation, and then we measured it almost exactly a year later because we wanted to see where we stood. We wanted that baseline and then to measure the growth. And there were 30 or 40 questions on our survey that covered a lot of broad areas across the bank, and we asked every single department, every single branch, every single employee to respond. And we measured it by location and department. We found that, from a numeric standpoint, we increased from a score of 5.47 last year to a score of 5.79 this year. But more impressive to us was the fact that we improved our scores in every single category, okay? Just by working on the culture, just by trying to bring in a more positive, upbeat, business-focused, employee-focused, recognition-focused culture. That and working on that net interest margin, working on fee income, communicating more among the employees and the senior management team. We've grown our earnings. In 2016, we made $9.2 million. Last year, of course, the numbers were muddied by the Tax Reform Act. We were on target to make about $10.2 million. This year, we're on target to make over $12 million. Most of that driven not by Tax Reform Act, but by loan growth. We've had loan growth year over year of about $80 million, driven by a lot of folks just excited to go out and sell and bring in new customers and bring in new business.
So from June to June, your bottom line was up, what you said, 27%, is that right?
That sounds about right.
Okay. So, and I always like to see that tracking because if you compound that over 3 years, you're about doubling your profitability every 3 years, and that's the game, right? So you're right on track for a really substantial increase in profitability. So that's really fantastic. Okay, so what would you say to anybody who's considering taking the journey that you took if they were facing the same issues that you were facing when you were starting?
I think the first advice that I would have for someone is to just say, just jump in and do it. Don't delay, just jump in and do it. Take it one step at a time. You can't do everything at once. It becomes too confusing, and the employees and especially management can't handle too much at one time. So take it one step at a time, but be 100% committed. Don't back down. Don't give it 95% or 90%. Be 100% committed. And then finally, and probably most importantly, is have fun with it. Have a good time. Celebrate, enjoy, and relish and embrace the successes of your fellow employees and of your staff.
Excellent. Well, and congratulations, Pete. What you're creating is nothing short of a legacy there in terms of really creating a franchise system for a bank that will sustain and thrive for a long time because you're building the predictable success machine right within it and getting everybody engaged and excited about it. So congratulations on some great success.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And especially we appreciate the help of you and your team for helping us make this great journey.
It is our delight to be able to be of service to you. It's been nothing but fun every day. Thanks so much, Pete.
Thank you, Roxanne.